Good morning and welcome to this hearing in the Sheku public inquiry. The inquiry will sit during this week and the week beginning 12 September. And I'm going to ask Senior Counsel to the inquiry to explain what evidence she intends to lead during this hearing. Ms. Graham.
Thank you. This hearing is a continuation of the previous hearing, which we concluded on day 60 of the inquiry on Friday the 26th of May this year, and related to post-incident management. There are 6 witnesses to conclude this hearing. We intend to call 3 this week. We will begin today with PC Fraser and move on tomorrow to Mr. McEwen, the former National Policing Commander and Head of Criminal Justice Services Division. And then we will conclude this week with Ms. Bole, who is a former Detective Chief Superintendent. In the week of the 12th of September, we intend to lead evidence from a former Detective Sergeant and Family Liaison Officer, Mr. Huliston, and from former Assistant Chief Constable Nicholson and Police Sergeant Miller. Fraser and Miller relate to the search on the Zaid Saheed family home. We led evidence from Mrs. Rashid and her father, Mr. Ahmed, about these events on day 39 on the 8th of February this year. After Mr. Ahmed gave evidence, I explained to you that we'd not heard from evidence from officers who attended the house on the 3rd of May. And at that time, the inquiry had not obtained inquiry statements from those officers. Mrs. Rashid's statement had only been received the day prior to her giving evidence. But we have subsequently invited comment from the officers who attended that house in relation to the evidence of Mrs. Rashid and Mr. Ahmed and the comments made in their respective inquiry statements. On that date when they gave evidence, I indicated we would be approaching those officers, and we have done so, and will be calling Fraser and Miller in relation to the search of the home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. Could we have the witness in now, please? Good morning, Constable Fraser.
Good morning.
Will you raise your hand and say the words of the oath after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
You are Police Constable Rhuaridh Fraser.
Yes.
What age are you?
49.
And you're a police constable with Police Scotland.
Yes.
And have been since you joined the police in 2009.
Yes.
There's a folder in front of you. I think it's a blue folder. Please feel free to have a look at it. Now, we've provided hard copies of some documents in this folder, and you should feel free to look at them if you prefer. Some people prefer hard copies, and some people are happy using the screen. So you'll also see the screen in front of you. And if I'm going to refer to any particular paragraphs in your inquiry statement, we'll bring that up on the screen so that others around the room can also see it. But at all times you'll have the hard copies available if you need them.
Good, thank you.
Let's just go through what's in the folder so you can familiarise yourself with it. You should see a scene entry log. So feel
Yes.
free to put your glasses on if that makes life
Thank you.
easier. So there should be a scene entry log. We'll come on to these in a moment, but that's from the 3rd of May 2015. And then a copy of your notebook from that day. The scene entry log, I think, is about 14 pages, so you might need to flick through.
Yep.
Yes. And then an operational statement that you prepared on the 20th of August 2015.
Yep.
And then the inquiry statement that you've prepared,
Yep.
or that you've signed. Now, could we maybe just for the moment bring up your inquiry statement onto the screen, and then you'll see it. And it's SBPI 00316. And we'll see that the witness statement there is PC Rhuaridh Fraser, that's you. And it was taken by a member of the team on the 3rd of April this year. And then if we can go down the page to the last paragraph is 92. Keep going. That's lovely. And you'll see there that paragraph 92, it says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And that was explained to you.
Yes.
And then we don't have your signature on the screen, but you should have it in the copy in your folder.
Yes.
And you signed that statement, and that was on the 4th of May this year.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the operational statement, PS 17782, is also in your folder. And if we could just skim through that, just go down the page. It's roughly about a page of A4, but I think we can see it on the screen here. Are those the only two statements that you've been asked to prepare or have?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, yes. Mhm.
Right. So it was if we can move to the top of the operational statement, this was one that you prepared yourself.
Yep.
Was that a request to prepare that, or was that just as part of your process of working?
I believe it was a request when they started collating everything from it. I believe it was the first part of the inquiry. I was told to write a statement
Right.
a fair time after the incident.
And who was the request from at that time?
No, I don't know. It's part of the Holmes inquiry. I don't know.
Okay. Was it the police or was it from PERC?
Police, I think.
Police, all right, thank you. Do you remember if PERC ever asked you to provide a statement or to speak to them and give a statement to them?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
I haven't spoken to Park as
Right.
far as I'm aware. Yeah.
And did the Crown ever come and ask for a recognition or for any more information from you?
I think that I was recognised.
Were you? When was that?
Possibly earlier at the beginning of this year.
Oh, right, not at the time.
No.
Right. We don't have a copy of that recognition. So all we have at the moment is your operational statement, which we see is dated the 20th of August 2015, and the inquiry statement that you gave and signed in May of this year.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing that we're missing that you remember or that
No.
you have?
No.
Okay, thank you. Now, in May of, we can take that off the screen, thank you. In May of 2015, I've already said you joined the police in 2009, so
Yeah.
you had about 6 years service in 2015. And were you based at Leavenmouth Police Station at that time?
Yes.
And you have said in your inquiry statement you were a response officer. We've heard about officers who are members of a response team. Is that the same thing?
Yes.
Thank you. And so you attended calls as and when required.
Yes.
So you hear airwaves messages. We've heard evidence of airwaves messages. They come over the radio and the response team will go out and deal with an incident. Is that the sort of work you were doing?
Yes.
And are you still in that role today?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, in 2015, in about the May, do you remember how often were you attending incidents when you were a response officer where there was an allegation that someone was holding a knife?
It wasn't uncommon.
We've heard a lot of evidence from different officers about this,
Mm-hmm.
and it varies. But we also heard from someone who's in ACR who said they would come in every shift.
Mm-hmm.
Would that surprise you to hear that?
No.
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 Does that match the sort of experience that you had?
Yes.
And when in 2015 you were attending an incident where someone is alleged to have a knife, how often did you require to use your equipment, such as your baton?
To the best of my knowledge, I haven't ever used my baton
Right.
or my pavel.
Or your Pava spray? And did you ever have CS spray?
Yep. Yep.
Had you ever sprayed that?
Personally, no.
Right.
Colleagues may well have done, but I certainly was never in a position to deploy.
Right. Thank you. Can we look first of all at your notebook? So that's PS 04704. And this will come up on the screen. And I think we can see the complete entry there on the screen. You'll see that some of the personal details are redacted
Yep.
on the screen, but you'll have the copy in front of you. And I think it says, with an asterisk beside it, Sunday the 3rd of May 2015. That's the day we're interested in. And you've said 0700, 1600, tour duty PS. So was that effectively the shift you were working that day?
Yes.
So from 7 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon.
Yes.
And then there's an entry beside 13:30 hours, so 1:30 in the afternoon you were on duty. And it says there, start locus protection, and this was at Zaid Sahid's home address.
Right.
Is that the time you, when you prepared this notebook, would that be at the time contemporaneously, or was it slightly after, or can you tell us?
Would have been slightly after. Just after I'd started it. Yeah.
So when you've started locus protection at 1:30,
Mm-hmm.
would you at some point, at a suitable moment, take your notebook out and prepare it?
Yes.
So is this the first sort of, the closest entry that you had made to the events?
Yes.
And then it says 1500, stood down for a comfort break. So you've been doing the locus protection from 1:30, 3 o'clock, you get a comfort break. A PC ward resumed, it said. Does that mean that they take over from you?
He would. That person would have covered me. Yeah.
And then you're back at 15:30, so 3:30, and it says resume locus protection at that address. And then you mention PC Adams. PC Adams was also present at that time.
Yep.
And then initial locus PO was with PC Aitken. What does that mean?
I assume it means initial locus protection. I've kind of abbreviated it, but not the R, PRO for protection.
Right.
I think it would have been made on the hoof, and my writing wasn't.
It's legible, so don't worry about that. And then it says 1800, 6 p.m. You're off duty. So does this sum up this page? Sum up your duty that day and what you were doing?
Yes.
And we can see it's brief. Is that pretty standard for entries in a notebook at that time in May 2015?
Yes, I treated the notebook as my notes, if you like, as well as noting statements or whatever that is created for myself, and that was the way I was trained, if you like, to use the notebook. Yeah, for my own records.
For people who are listening who maybe don't understand police procedures, can you explain how these entries benefit you in your work?
To record what I've done and what requires to be recorded and for my memory. Yeah.
We've heard from other officers that they often rely on entries in their notebook to then prepare their operational statement.
Yep.
Is that the
Yes.
sort of thing you do?
Yes.
So is it helpful to you to have the date and the timings and that sort
Yes.
of thing?
Yep.
And although this is brief, does that then allow you to expand on that in your operational statement?
Yes.
You don't need any more information than this in your notebook then?
No.
And seeing those timings and entries, is that sufficient to prompt your memory on what you were doing that day?
It would be if I was requiring to produce a statement shortly after or
Right.
within the time frame of court. Yeah.
And can you help us? Obviously, we've heard from officers who prepare operational statements, and we understand that they might be sent to the Crown Office
Mhm.
to give the Crown a better understanding of what was happening.
Mhm.
What was your practice in relation to preparing operational statements? Did you prepare them shortly after, or did you have no fixed sort of practice?
It would normally be done fairly not too far into the not too far away from the incident. Yeah, time wise it wouldn't be an extended period.
And when you say it wouldn't be an extended period, what does that mean?
Months
Right.
later.
So it wouldn't normally be months later.
Mhm. Yeah.
Why would that be?
Because it's usually required fairly promptly after the incident. If there's a statement to be produced, then it's usually required very promptly after, and quite often before you terminate duty. Yeah.
Right. We'll hear more about what you did that day, but we understand that locus protection is an important part of the work of an officer.
Yep.
And is that something that the Crown Office might be interested in knowing about at some stage?
Not usually.
Not usually.
No.
So you never have to give evidence in court at any trials or anything like that?
I've never had to give evidence regarding locus protection unless something has occurred, but it never has to me anyway.
No big disputes on locus protection?
No.
But you've given evidence before,
Yes,
presumably. This isn't your first time?
No.
Okay. So in this case, we mentioned your operational statement was prepared on the 20th of August.
Right.
So that's over 3 months after your notebook entry.
Mhm.
And that is months after.
Yep.
Why did you not prepare an operational statement shortly after or on the 3rd of May?
No, I wasn't told to.
So you only prepare them when you're told to?
Yeah.
All right. So it's not a situation where you've done locus protection and you think, I should be doing some operational statement?
No, it didn't. certainly my line managers and whatnot, who would normally tell me to create an operational statement after an incident, there was no mention of a requirement for that at the time.
Right. So it's only if you get a request or an order from a manager
Mhm.
to do that.
Yep.
And who would the manager be that would normally invite you or request you, require you to do a statement?
More often than not, it was a duty sergeant, but he would be telling us to do it. Yep.
Right. But no such request on
No.
this occasion. Was that unusual or was that pretty standard?
Pretty standard. I mean, there was nothing. There wasn't. It wasn't immediately after an incident or anything of that sort, and so I didn't expect to have to do one, and there was no request given to me to do one. So.
And does that have any bearing or does it reflect in any way on how significant an incident is or a property is in an investigation?
Yeah.
Why is that? Could you explain that?
I assume it was purely because there was nothing of note occurred, and there wasn't any incident. And there was nothing happened at that locus.
So as far as you were concerned, it wasn't a significant incident
Yeah,
and there was no need for an operational statement.
absolutely. Yep.
Tell me if I'm misinterpreting what you say.
No, absolutely. It was. There was nothing of note happened,
Right.
to my knowledge, that day, and it was just a run-of-the-mill day. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Can we turn now to the scene entry logbook, which is PS 18504. Now, this is, we have a PDF here. I think that's about 14 pages. Can we just have a quick look at this, maybe at some of the writing in it? If we perhaps go to a page, sorry, I haven't noted the page. If we look at page 9, for example, this page is fine. The writing there, is that your writing?
No.
That's not your writing. Whose writing would that be?
Whoever was attending at the scene would fill in their name and their reasons for being there and the time they arrived.
Right. And can we look at the next page, please? Sorry, move on. Keep going, thank you. Right, this page here, sorry, whose writing's that?
The first two entries is my writing. Yep.
Right. And that's your name, Fraser, Rhuaridh
Yes.
Fraser. And it says there, well, let's look at this table. There's a line at the very top. First column is time, date in and logist details. And the first entry is 13:30 hours on the 3rd of May 2015. And it's your name and your PC number there.
Yep.
Does that mean you were the logist of the scene entry log?
The first entry being mine, it was my responsibility initially
Right.
to start the crime scene log.
Right. So you were the one that started it. Was this the first entry that was made by you?
It would be, yes. Other than the front cover. Yep.
What's on the front cover?
It is
We can go back to the
The-
first page.
date.
Is it that the front cover that you're talking about? It
Yes,
says time,
yep.
date commenced 13/30/35/15.
Yep.
So was that was your writing as well?
Yes.
And this is for Mr. Said's home address?
Yes.
And it says scene entry log. Can we go back now to the previous page with your name at the top? That's page 9. And it says, so we've got your name here. You've started the log and you started it with the first entry 13:30.
Yep.
So you arrived shortly prior to that, did you?
Yes.
Do you remember what time you arrived?
No. It wouldn't have been long before.
Right. And then it says your reason for entry, secure locus, locus protection.
Hmm.
And what does that mean, just for people who are listening to your evidence today?
That means that I was sent to secure it and guard it.
Right.
So basically go there and make sure nothing happened inside.
All right.
Nobody came or went, yeah.
Right. Thank you. We'll come back to this document in detail shortly. Let me look first of all at your operational statement now, and that is PS 17782, please. We had that on the screen a short time ago. So this is the statement prepared on the 20th of August 2015 in Leavenmouth Police Station, and it was at 15:28 hours. And let's just look at what you've said in this statement. You've told us that on Sunday the 3rd of May you were working at 7 till 4 in the afternoon. You were with PC Aitken. And then about 1 o'clock on the same date, we were requested by the duty sergeant at Leavenmouth to attend at Zaid Sahid's home address and put in place a locus protection. We were advised that there were no persons within the property at the time. On arrival a short time later, same date, there were lights on within the kitchen, and this made me believe there may be persons within. I knocked at the kitchen door and confirmed there were 5 persons within, 2 adult females, 2 young children and a disabled male. Their details were added to the scene log. We thereafter immediately contacted Leavenmouth CID, and DCs Petrie and Miller attended at the locus. All persons within were removed by DCs Petrie and Miller. PC Aitken and I took up positions at the front and rear of the property. I was relieved from my post about 1800 hours, same date, by other officers, and I took no further part in this inquiry. And that really sums up your involvement that day.
Yes.
When you prepared this statement, was that on the basis of your notebook, or your notebook plus some recollection that you had at that time?
My notebook and some recollection I had at the time, yeah.
And does this statement sum up, really, at that time, your recollection of events?
Yes.
And looking at the size of this statement, if we could move to the top, please, we'll see it's really quite brief. But I'd like to ask you some details about it. You mention, if we can just come down the page a little, you do mention that your involvement, right, if we could stop there. So about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you were requested by the duty sergeant to attend and put in place a locus protection. And can I ask you first of all, we've heard other evidence about operational statements and how long they have to be or how detailed they have to be. And I'm wondering, is this a pretty standard operational statement for someone that's involved? It's quite brief.
Well, for what I was involved in, it's fairly standard, yeah.
So people might have the impression that operational statements have to be very detailed or lengthy. Was that not something that was necessary?
I felt at the time that what I've put in the statement was sufficient for what I was involved in at that locus.
And if people are looking for more information, can they come back to you and go over the further detail if they have any?
Yeah, I can.
But in terms of actually a prepared operational statement by you, self-penned as some people call it, it's enough just to put in those very briefest of details.
Yeah.
Thank you. You've said that, as I say, locus protection. And you were advised that there were no persons in the property at the time. So when you went to the house, you weren't expecting anyone to be there.
Yep.
Can you explain what difference does it make if you attend a property expecting no one to be there?
Well, being provided with information that there's nobody in, and then going and there being people in, would mean something wasn't right, as in the information I was provided with. So naturally I went to find out who was inside the house. Yep.
And you say there you arrived a short time later. Presumably Leavenmouth isn't far from this property.
To the best of my knowledge, I wouldn't have been in the station. I would have been somewhere in the area, in the response area, anywhere in Leavenmouth. Yeah.
So you were out on touring the area. And you say there were lights on in the kitchen. That's what alerted you to the fact there were people in the house.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you then indicate, I knocked at the kitchen door and confirmed there were 5 persons within. And you detail who those were. And you added them to their details to the scene log. And you contacted Leavenmouth CID, so you called them on your radio?
I think I spoke to the duty sergeant, who's my line manager, I'm assuming that's what I did, to the best of my recollection, and he would have passed that information on to the CID.
Do you remember who the duty sergeant was that
No.
day? We've heard from DS Dursley. Do you remember DS Dursley?
Yep,
Could it have been him?
it could have been.
He's someone you're familiar with? Or
I'm familiar with the name from
Yeah,
back then.
from
yeah.
when you worked there?
Yep.
And how did you go about confirming there were 5 persons within the property?
That must have been when I knocked and went and was afforded entry into the house, and that must have been what I observed from being in the house.
Right. And when you were given entry to the property, where did you go when you were inside?
To the best of my recollection, I think it would be barely a few paces. I don't recall being much anywhere really in the house. Yeah.
We've heard evidence that when you go in the back door of the property, that leads into the kitchen. Does that ring any bells for you?
That could be right, yeah.
And then that the living room is sort of visible or a very short distance into the living room. Do you remember if you went in there?
No.
No. And I'd like to ask you, just before we leave this part, it says that you put, you know who was there, their details were added to the scene log. You said a moment ago that that wasn't your writing in the scene log. So when their details were added to the scene log, who was doing the writing at that stage?
I've no idea. I couldn't tell you. I have no memory of it.
Right. So can you help me understand? You have started to prepare the scene log.
Mm-hmm.
You put the address and the date and time on page 1, and you fill your name in
Mm-hmm.
as the logist at the top.
Yep.
And you're there with PC Aitken, I think you said.
Yes.
Are there any other officers there at that time?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
I can't. I'm assuming that being sent with PC Aitken, it would have been myself and PC Aitken there.
Right. And you've started the log, and it says in your operational statement that the details of the occupants were added to the log, and we can see that they are in the log.
Right.
Why would you have not completed that section yourself and presumably handed it to PC Aitken?
I can only assume that PC Aitken took the details. I don't recall doing it.
Right. And do you want to look at that log again? Are you sure that's not your writing? Let's look back at the log just for a moment, which is PS 18504. And if we can scan down the page, here we are. And we see here, well, if we could go up to the top of the page, please, just slightly up. It says scene entry log, person known to have accessed the scene prior to the commencement of the log. And this can include emergency services, relatives, neighbours. So this is people who are in the house when you arrive.
Right.
Well, that's right, isn't it? Yeah. And then it says the time and the details of their description, reason for attendance, what they were doing. And you'll see here the entries. If we can go down to, I think, let's look at page 8 first of all. Right, yes, that you've passed it, sorry. That's it. You'll see 1310, 3 May 2015. There's 2 entries there. The names are redacted, but it says in locus on police arrival. And the second one says within bedroom and living areas. But none of that's your writing.
No.
Right. Who would have been writing this at 1310 if it wasn't you, or was this prepared later?
I can only assume it was my colleague that wrote those, and we must have arrived round about 1310.
So you arrived about 1310, and when you say your colleague, do you mean PC Aitken
Yeah.
filled this in?
Me.
And did PC Aitken fill this in before you started the log or after?
It would have been entered retrospectively after I'd started the book.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if we can go back to the previous page, please. And we see a number of entries there. If we look at the bottom of the page first, it's 1309 on that date. There's 3 entries. The top one is Mrs. Rashid. We've heard evidence from Mrs. Rashid. In locus on police arrival. And within the living areas. What does that mean, within living areas?
I didn't write it, so I couldn't say.
So that's not a standard
Within
phrase
living areas, it would be kitchen, living room.
Right. And then the first 2 entries, the first entry at 2 o'clock is Mr. Ahmed, father, and he was there to assist moving his disabled son, and he was within the living room and bedroom areas. Yeah. And then another entry that's redacted at the same time to assist moving disabled male. And they seem to both have been within living room and bedroom areas. Right. But were you there when that entry was made?
I was outside the building doing locust protection.
So how common is it for you as the logist to hand the scene entry log over to someone else and be outside the property without a scene entry log?
The crime scene log was created and is then whoever enters and leaves.
Gets to take
It's
it with
logged.
them?
No, just is logged, and whoever is, it must have been my colleague PC Aitken, who was in the area of their arrival.
So it's not the situation that you stand outside the property with the scene entry log and hand it over to someone else who's going into the property?
They're handed it to fill it in and then hand
Right.
it back.
Right. All right, so if PC Aitken wrote this, PC Aitken must have taken it with PC Aitken into the property to see, or am I misunderstanding you? Sorry.
My understanding would be that it would remain outside the locus, and
Right.
but on this occasion, with there being people inside, she may have taken it in to log who was in
All right.
on her arrival.
Thank you. And can we look at your inquiry statement, please? SBPI 00316. And if we can look at paragraphs 6 to 9, please. So paragraph 6, this is your inquiry statement. It took me a great deal of thought to remember this event. I went back to my notebook and it didn't help my memory much at all. This statement is different to what my memory has produced. My recollection was that I requested to attend to provide uniformed assistance to business-dressed CID officers and take up locus. It appears I was sent just to set up a locus. My memory tells me I went in with the CID and there were people within. Thereafter, I was just leaving and doing locus protection at front and back. 8, I thought I was going in with the CID to confirm to the occupiers that CID were who they said they were. That was my memory. My statement seems to suggest I was sent to set up a locus and that was it. I can only assume this statement is far more accurate than my memory. There was nothing significant about the incident for my memory to have a better memory of it. I had almost no memory of it, to be honest. So let's have a look at that, those sections. Let's look at paragraph 6, first of all. And your notebook didn't help your memory much.
No.
We've seen it, obviously. And this statement is different to what my memory has produced. When you say this statement, are you talking about your operational statement is different or your inquiry statement is different?
The statement I provided initially a few months after is different to what my memory has produced. Yeah.
So that's the operational statement is different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in your memory, obviously, of the events. And I think what you say is your recollection, so this is your memory of events.
Mm-hmm.
You were asked to attend to provide uniformed assistance to business-dressed CID officers. So they were CID officers, but they were just in a suit or business dress.
Yes.
So to anyone, any member of the public, they might not realise they were police officers.
Yes.
But you would be in uniform.
Yes.
Right. And you were there to take up locus. Does that mean to do locus protection?
Yes.
So stand at the front or the back of the property with your scene entry log and note who's going in and out of the property.
Yeah.
And it appears I was sent just to set up a locus, but my memory tells me I went in with the CID and there were people within. So tell us about your memory of events. Rather, there's no mention of you being sent in with CID in the scene entry log. I mean, the scene entry log says you arrived, you're to do locus protection, not to be going into the property.
Yeah.
Although you have told us you did go into the kitchen. So my memory tells me I went in with the CID and there were people within. So just tell us a little bit more about that.
When I got there and realised there was people in, I think I went in. I went in to see who was there, and then radioed that back to my line manager, and I waited for CID, who turned up fairly swiftly. And then in order to, with the CID being dressed in business dress, to reinforce and to confirm to the people in that they were police officers, I would go in as well.
So you went in initially to see who was in the property. And was it that the point where you or someone, maybe PC Aitken, put the entries into the scene entry log as to the names of the occupants? Or would that have been later?
It would have been later. I think, according to my memory, I went in myself just to see.
Right, so PC Aitken wasn't initially going into the property, just yourself?
As far as I can, yeah.
And you were finding out who was in the property.
Mm-hmm.
And then, did you remain in the property or did you leave the property?
Well, I left the property.
You left the property, called duty sergeant and waited for CID to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went back into the property with the CID.
Yes.
And how many CID turned up?
Two, I think. Just two, yep.
Now, I don't know if you'll remember their names, we've got inquiry statements from then a DC Miller and a DC Petrie.
Right.
Does that ring any bells for you?
The names do.
Right.
Yeah.
And were those the CID officers who
Yes.
turned up? And you went in with them. So this is the second time you've walked into the property. Where did you go that time with the CID?
I don't imagine it would have been any further. I have no memory of it. With going in to convey that the gents in business dress are police associated with me, I don't think I would have gone any further, but I don't have any memory of it.
When you say not gone any further, what do you mean by that?
Other than to show my presence, to reassure that these two in business dress are police as well. Although they had warrant cards and whatnot, it's often easier and quicker if you, to display myself or a uniformed officer with them.
So you're there to sort of vouch their credentials
Yes,
in a sense.
yeah.
And was that into the kitchen or into the living room? Do you remember at all?
A few paces in the door, which I assume would most likely be the kitchen, but I don't know.
Don't remember. And so you were there to vouch for the CID. Who walked in first?
I don't know.
No. Well, do you have any recollection if you walked in first or if the CID officers walked in first?
I have no recollection of that, no.
Do you remember, did someone knock on the door or ring a bell, or was
No.
the door open?
I don't remember.
So your operational statement and certainly your notebook seem to be suggesting you were there for locust protection. But at this stage, would you say that your purpose had altered to then vouch for the CID?
Yes.
There's no reference to that in the scene entry log. Is that not something that should have been mentioned?
Possibly, yeah.
And what would the reasons be for not mentioning that?
Because it was... I can only assume it was because it was so brief and I didn't carry out any purpose other than to visually vouch for the CID officers.
When you say visually vouch, what does that mean?
My presence with them would... to show that they were with me.
Did you say anything?
I don't... I don't remember, to be honest.
It's just this idea of visually vouching
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to explaining. Would that not be the normal way to explain by talking to people?
Yes, but I can only assume the CID officers they were kind of in charge, so it would be up to them to say what was going on, what they were looking for.
Did you not feel it was your place to really say anything at that stage?
I don't remember what happened. I can only assume that I would have generally, if I'm used to vouch for business dress officers, then my presence is all that's required. I'm not required to do anything else, unless they're expecting any sort of physical resistance, in which case I've got PPE and things that I would be able to assist with.
So this is something that the visual vouching is something that you would commonly do as part of your role.
Yes.
And who was then in charge of what was going on at that time, would you say?
The CID officers.
Right. And because of the fact they're in charge, are they the ones doing the talking?
Yes.
And do you ever say very much if you're just there as a visual?
Yes.
I wonder if people are reassured just by you being there. You're there to what does it say? You're there to vouch for the officers. Are you confident that people are always reassured by your presence standing there not saying anything?
I haven't thought about it. That's what my role. That's what I was told to do. Just so, yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. Just thinking about it now, obviously you've got even more experience now, and you've been an officer for many years. Nowadays, thinking about it, do you think you could be more reassuring perhaps by speaking or introducing people who are there in plain clothes?
Yes. And if the people having my face have already been in the door and then reappearing again, I would, yes, introduce the officers.
So now, if you were in that situation, do you think you'd be a little bit more vocal?
It would entirely depend on the situation, but
Of course.
as a rule, yeah.
You would now. Would you try and maybe give I just wonder if maybe that could be quite intimidating, with 3 officers being present in a kitchen, and the person I've seen before isn't saying a word. Just wonder how reassuring that would be to people,
But I accept
members of
it.
the public.
But I don't recall if I said anything or not. So, if that was the case, then I could, yes, with what you're inferring, it could be worrying, yeah.
Yeah. Right, and there's no mention of this second entry into the house in your operational statement. Was that something you didn't remember in the August when you prepared your operational statement?
Yeah, I would imagine it wasn't in my statement because I didn't remember it, and because it was so insignificant a contribution.
So your impression was that it was insignificant at that second visit into the house?
Yeah, there was nothing that created a memory for me.
Right. And in paragraph 9, if we can see the complete paragraph 9, it says, I can only assume this statement is far more accurate than my memory. There was nothing significant about the incident for my memory to have a better memory of it. I had almost no memory of it, to be honest. Now, you'll understand that the chair has your statement, your notebook, your inquiry statement, and he's now hearing evidence. And I just want to be clear so that the chair can understand. You've said here, as many officers have, well, my operational statement will be a lot more accurate than my memory now. But I think, would it be fair to say that in relation to your operational statement, which we've seen is very brief,
Yep.
that your memory actually provides further information for the chair to rely on than just what is contained in your operational statement?
Yes.
So perhaps in certain areas, your operational statement is not the complete picture.
Yes.
It's not 100% accurate in relation to all the things that you were involved in.
It hasn't got no, yes.
So it's not got everything, it's not complete. And would it be fair to say that in relation to your operational statement, that actually the chair should have particular regard to the oral evidence that you're giving today?
Yes.
And that maybe will give him a clearer picture of the full events.
Possibly, yep.
Right, thank you. That's very helpful. And can I ask you about paragraph 4 of your inquiry statement, just while we're being totally clear about these things. You've said when you gave a statement to the inquiry team, you've read your previous statement, that's the operational statement we're talking about. I've no recollection of creating this. I wrote it myself on the 20th of August 2015. As with all my statements, I wrote a true and accurate account to the best of my recollection at the time. My memory was better when I wrote the statement than it is now. But again, perhaps that paragraph should be considered in light of the fact that you're able to recollect further information now and to share that with the chair, and not everything is in your operational statement.
Yes, not everything.
Right. So he should not read the operational statement as being the complete picture.
No.
And actually there are additional pieces of things in your memory that we're able to bring out today that were just not recorded in your notebook or your statement.
Yeah.
Right. And once you had a chance to read your operational statement, did you remember writing it? Or do you still really not remember writing it?
I still don't remember writing it. I don't dispute it is my statement. I've just... I had to ask my inspector as to why I did a statement a few months after the date in question, and it was him that advised me that it would have been as part of the Holmes inquiry set up to collate all the information that a statement would have been requested.
Right. But not something that you thought on the day would be necessary. And again, if we can look back to your inquiry statement, paragraph 12, just again to complete this section, we see this statement, maybe I should look at the previous paragraph, sorry. So this still looking at your operational statement. This follows on, paragraph 12, from the earlier paragraphs that were talking about your operational statement. So let's look at paragraph 12. This statement is more likely to be accurate than my memory, seeing as it was prepared nearer the time. My sergeant wouldn't prepare this for me. It reads that it was verified as my own statement, but I can't remember the mechanics of it. It would be a box or tick, to tick, sorry, I'm not reading this well, but I can't remember the mechanics of it, if it would be a box to tick or something like that. What does that mean?
That, from what I know now, would be as part of the Holmes inquiry, wanting a statement of my involvement in...
Right. So the Holmes computer will identify that you were involved for locust protection.
Yes.
and they want a statement from you confirming that.
Yes.
So that they have a complete picture they can collate. But again, what we've said about this operational statement not being 100% accurate
Yeah.
stands. Now, we also have the benefit of PC Aitken's statement, who you
Right.
attended the property with. And just something you said there about being your statement. Can we look at PS 17782, please? And you'll see that, oh, sorry. Oh, so, sorry, I've got the wrong number. I'll get that checked and we'll come back to that. If you, actually, I think I might have a copy of it here. Sorry, it's PS 08011. I'm not sure if we'll have that on the playlist. We might have to come back to this in a moment. All right. I will come back to that after the break.
Yep.
And we'll get that on the screen. So there seem to be two main differences as I read your operational statement and your inquiry statement and what you said today. And I just want to be clear about those. The first relates to whether you were asked to assist CID, and that's why you went in for the second visit in. Or whether you were just there as a sort of silent vouching of the CID, or whether you went in to provide further assistance to the CID. Do you remember?
No.
I'm just wondering if you simply went in, uniformed, silent, and then went back out, or whether you went into the house and assisted the CID.
Oh, no, I was just in as a... I can only assume I was in purely just to silently vouch
Right.
for CID, which isn't unusual.
Right.
I wasn't assisting them. Yep.
Okay, let's go through these events then. You have contacted the duty sergeant. We have evidence available to us that it was DS Dursley that you contacted.
Oh, right, right.
We've actually heard from DS Dursley in evidence. He
Right.
gave evidence on day 41 of the inquiry, which for others' benefit was the 28th of February. And he gave you an instruction to secure the Zaid Sahid family home, to secure it as a locus, to take along a scene entry log and shut it down as a locus. And I think he was the one that told you there wasn't anyone at the address.
Right.
And then I think we have a record of your response. PC Fraser, 431 from 43 Bravo. Does that mean something to you?
431 from 43 Bravo. That would be me on the radio calling 431 as in the duty sergeant, my line manager, and 43 Bravo would have been my call sign.
Right. And you'd said it's currently occupied. There's a female and her son, her brother and her mother, all here at this time. Details in as to who's within and pass them back over. And Dursley said, yeah, that's all received. Just stand by, I'll get the DS to get directly in touch with you. And then at paragraph 83 of your inquiry statement, you were asked to listen to that, I think, when the inquiry team took a statement from you. Now, if we can have a look at paragraph 83, you say that is you speaking.
Yep.
The fact I'm radioing to say it's currently occupied is that I was there thinking it wasn't occupied. That gives me the impression I went there to secure the locus, as in that nobody was there, and that fits in with your operational statement. And then I think there's another, you were asked to listen to another airwave transmission for those who are here, PS 08297. And the duty sergeant said, "Bravo, the CID here are going to nip down. Basically, it's a case of obtaining details from people within, and we're going to try and get them elsewhere. But as I say, CRD are going to come down with a car and give you a hand with that." And you said, yes, we're just in the process of noting particulars, is it?
Yes.
And what does that mean for people who are listening? Is that...
Noting particulars is someone's name. Usually it's your name, date of birth, address, phone number,
All right.
place of birth.
Place of birth. Is that sort of contact details, and so you can identify the person?
Yeah.
Is that in case you need to get in touch with them later?
Yes.
And is that the sort of task that when you're completing the scene entry log that you would do normally, or...?
Well, it wasn't normal because we were sent to a locus that wasn't supposed to be anybody there, but there was. So,
Is that not normal, that there's people at a locus when you arrive?
with my instruction being to go and secure a locus and there being nobody in, and then arriving and there was people in, and that circumstance hasn't arisen to me before. So part of securing the locus, I would want to know who was in the house. Yep.
So you'd never arrived at a locus and there were people in?
I'd never been told to go to a locus and secure it. And there being people inside with, no, I hadn't done that before.
That had never happened before 2015?
Not to myself, as far as I can recall, no.
Right. And
Not on that, not when there isn't some prior involvement in the locus, yeah. So normally to secure a locus it would be after an incident or through some mechanism, but it's the first time I've been sent to a locus to secure it with people inside, yeah.
Right. And had you been given any training or instructions in relation to how to handle this sort of situation?
Not that I recall. I would just be assuming that we would need to know who was inside, so
Right.
to find out.
Right. Did you think about what the sort of authority was that you had to go in and ask people who they were and what their name and date of birth and address and phone number and place of birth were?
I don't think. I didn't ask the questions, no.
Mm-hmm. Did you know from, you obviously didn't know from experience, did you know from training or information that you might need authority to go in and ask people for these details?
I don't recall just entering the property. I don't recall what happened exactly, but I would imagine asking, they can refuse. If I ask them for their details, they're perfectly entitled to refuse. But I hadn't been informed there was a warrant or anything of that sort.
Right. And did you tell people that they could refuse to provide that information?
No.
And you'd not been informed there was a warrant. We've heard evidence that there wasn't a warrant. And you'd not been told that. Was that something that you would normally have checked as part of your role? Or
If there had been a warrant, I would have been told, yeah.
Right. So were you able to assume that there wasn't a warrant?
Yep.
Did you understand the circumstances where you might need to seek a warrant?
I wasn't aware of the reason why the locus needed secured, and it didn't. I don't think it entered my head regards a warrant. I was just. I assume mine just knocked on the door and it got opened, and I asked and what was going on. That's all I can assume I did, because I wouldn't have just marched in.
Right. And you weren't aware of the reason why the property was to be secured.
No.
Is that information that you would have found helpful?
Probably, yeah.
And would it have helped you to engage more fully with the occupants if you'd been provided with that information?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, obviously, as a more experienced officer,
Mm-hmm.
Is that the sort of information you'd find helpful if you're going into someone's house?
Yes, I would probably these days seek more information before. Just with the instruction I was given, I would probably seek more knowledge about what was involved. Yeah.
And what would the benefit be to you in carrying out your role if you were given more information?
It would allow me a greater understanding of, as it turns out, who was in the house, and a greater background on bases to work from as to who might be in the house or whatnot.
And what about your involvement with the family who were there, or the occupiers? We'll come on to that in more detail, but would it help you in that respect?
Yes,
And
It
how-
would just give me a greater understanding of who was likely to be in, or
Yeah.
yeah.
And who in Leavenmouth or anywhere would be in a position to provide you with that information? Or in the role you're in now, who would you go to get more information?
I would automatically go to my line manager, my duty sergeant, for
Right.
automatically to them, or unless I was in direct communication with CID in this case. But I would be looking for my duty manager, my line manager, to provide me with more information,
Put you in a better position.
give me a better picture. Yeah.
Yeah. And would you normally go to the CID to ask for information
No,
when
I
they
wouldn't.
arrive, or?
No, I would normally be my line manager. Yeah.
Yeah.
The duty sergeant. Yeah.
And in terms of training, do you think that there are areas where you could maybe have been given more training on these things? You know, obviously you've not faced this situation before. Do you think further training in relation to this, approaching a house and securing a locus and speaking to the occupants, would that have been quite helpful?
Well, it's not a situation I've come across prior to this, and I haven't since.
Right.
And you can't be trained on every possible eventuality and to do what. So you get trained, and then you learn on the job, and you do what you think's best.
So you didn't have any learning on the job in relation to this scenario. Do you think that if you'd been given training about this scenario or this type of situation, that might have plugged a gap there?
Could well have done.
Yeah. Maybe put you in a better position to know what to do, what the limit of your authority was and what the options were.
Yes.
As well as the warrant, we've also heard other officers talk about consent being a legitimate way of gaining access to a property or securing items in a property. And Is that something you're aware of?
Yes.
So if people consent, you don't need a warrant, I think is what we've been told.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes.
Can you explain to me how you go about obtaining consent if you're doing locust protection and you want the details of the occupancy? You said earlier they were entitled to refuse, but can you explain how you would go about getting consent?
For their details or to get into the
Well,
house?
either for their details or to get into the property. Or do you not think you need consent for either of those?
Oh, yeah. I would. I wouldn't. I would knock on the door and introduce myself, and if I was allowed entry, then I would go in.
Right.
And if and I would just ask questions, speak to them, and ask them who are you, and can you give me your name, address, date of birth, that sort of thing. It would be through talk, yeah.
Yeah. And we heard some evidence previously from a DC Finch, actually, who said that he would, if he was asking someone for consent in the absence of a warrant, that he would explain to them why he was there, and he would explain that they could withdraw consent at any time. He was asking for consent, but they could withdraw that. They were free to say no.
Yep.
And he would write that down in his notebook and then get them to sign it. And is that something you would have done in 2015?
I think I would have verbalised that and not necessarily have got a signature in my notebook.
Right. Thinking about that evidence that we've heard, do you think that would be a good way of proceeding to make sure that there's a signature somewhere
Yes.
confirming? Yeah. And is that the sort of thing you do now if you're seeking consent, or do you just simply rely on conversations?
I would certainly, yeah. To be blunt, I don't have that scenario prop up where I work now, but
Right.
yes, that would be something I would be
Yeah.
looking to do now. Yeah.
Right. You've got more experience now,
Mhm.
even though that's not your current role. But you're still in a response team, are you?
Yes.
You've not got any up-to-date experience of turning up at a locus and securing it and
But
finding occupants?
I secure locuses, yes, and do locus protection duties where I am now, but I haven't come across a similar incident like this in my recent years.
Right, okay.
But I would always seek a signature nowadays.
Nowadays, right. And is that because of experience or because you've had additional training? Or is it something else? Is it an SOP or guidance that you've been given?
It's more because the procedures now require us signatures for all sorts of things now that weren't required previously.
Right. And previously, including 2015?
Yes, yeah.
So we know that there's nothing in your notebook on that date. So can I assume that you didn't obtain a signature somewhere from the occupier to consent to giving you information and you entering the property, or for the CID to enter the property?
I can only assume that. Well, I have no signatures, so there was no written consent.
Right. And when you say no written consent, do you think there was some other consent?
I believe I must have been afforded entry into the house. I didn't know any of the details of the people, but in order to speak to the people within, I can only assume, I don't recall, but I can only assume I knocked on the door and the door was opened.
Do you consider the opening of a door sufficient to be a recognition of consent?
No. The person must, it can, in numerous ways, they can verbally say it, or they can just motion or walk away, leave the door open.
All right.
Um,
As an open invitation,
Yes.
if you like, to coming in. Do you remember if on that day that anyone gave you consent to go into the house?
I don't remember.
And when the CID went in and you went in with them on that second occasion, do you remember if anyone gave you consent at that time?
No, I don't remember.
Excuse me, I wonder if this might be a possible time to...
If this is a convenient point, we'll stop for 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Before the break, we were talking about you'd not been told there was a warrant, and we talked about consent.
Yep.
You also said that occupiers can refuse to give you details or allow you access to the house. Are there circumstances where people can't refuse to provide information to the police or to allow their house to be entered and searched?
If there's a warrant in place,
Right. Are there any other circumstances that you've come across in your experience?
where they can refuse to give their name.
Yes. I'm just asking in case there's anything we've not covered. We've obviously looked at the issue of a warrant and we've looked at consent. Are there any other circumstances? Maybe if there's some sort of... We've heard other evidence there might be some sort of emergency situation that permits the police to do things.
Yeah, well, if there's something ongoing, or if you're in pursuit of a suspect in a house, or
Okay. Do you know much more about that possibility? And from your own experience?
I haven't had that sort of experience yet.
Absolutely fine, thank you. Now, I was going to ask you about the statement from PC Aitken,
Right.
and I wonder if we could have that on the screen. We've got that now. It's PS 08011. Now, at the moment, we don't have the facility to split the screen and show you two things. It might be the lettering be a bit small anyway. What I'm going to do is just quickly read through your statement, and we'll identify the differences between your statement and PC Aitken's. Is that all right?
Yes.
Right. So your statement, which is PS 17782, has at the top your name, PC Fraser, your date of birth, your 6 years service at the time, and the place you were stationed, Leavenmouth Police Station.
Yes.
And we'll see on the screen PC Aitken's statement follows the same sort of style, same format.
Yeah.
And then your statement says, which I'm reading from, statement at 15:28 hours on 20th of August 2015. Now her date of preparation is slightly different, so she's prepared her statement at 7:51 on the 11th of August. So that's 9 days before you prepared yours. Same police station. She says, unaccompanied statement verified as own source notebook. So it appears that PC Aitken prepared her own statement, same as you did.
Yeah.
And she used her notebook, same as you did.
Right.
And then I'm reading out yours, all right? And we can follow as we look through PC Aitken's. So this is your statement. PS 17782 states, I am a uniformed police constable stationed at Leavenmouth Police Station. On Sunday, 3rd May 2015, I was working at 0700 to 1600 hours, tour of duty, on uniformed mobile patrol within the Leavenmouth area, accompanied by PC Aitken. You say PC Aitken, her statement says PC Fraser. So you were both together. And then moving on to the next paragraph, about 1300 hours, same date. We were requested by the duty sergeant at Leavenmouth to attend at Zahid Sahid's home address, is redacted, and put in place a locus protection. We were advised that there were no persons within the property at the time. Your statement and hers seemed to be exactly in accordance. Yes. And then it says, on arrival a short time later, same date, there were lights on within the kitchen, and this made me believe there may be persons within. And to that extent, you say, that's what you've said, and she says, on arrival at approximately 13:05 hours, same date. So she adds in a time. That wasn't a time that was within your notebook, but she seems to have an additional recollection.
Right.
Do you agree that that was roughly the time that you arrived, just shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
I can't dispute it. Yeah, it's quite possible.
Have you any reason to think that that's wrong or incorrect?
No.
This is your statement. There were lights on within the kitchen, and this made me believe there may be persons within. And she says, we noted there were lights on within the kitchen. And then she recollects the weather. It was a dark afternoon due to inclement weather, and this made me believe there may be persons within. So she's got some additional information there about the weather. And then your statement reads, I knocked at the kitchen door and confirmed there were 5 persons within, 2 adult females, 2 young children and a disabled male. Their details were added to the scene. Their details were added to the scene log. We thereafter immediately contacted Leavenmouth CID, and DC Petrie and Miller attended at locus. Do you see that? So again, there seem to be similarities between your statement, which I'm reading, and the statement on the screen from PC Aitken. And then it says all persons within were removed by DCs Petrie and Miller. That's the same sentence. PC Aitken and I took up positions at the front and rear of the property. And she says PC Fraser and I took up positions at the front and rear of the property. At 1600 hours, PC Adams attended and took over my position, and I was stood down. So she has an extra recollection about PC Adams arriving. I think you mentioned that he was there as well. Not in your statement, but it was in the scene entry log. And then I took no further part in this inquiry. I cannot identify the accused. It looks like these statements are in very similar terms. I mean, in some respects, the wording is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, you said earlier before the break that you'd written your own statement. I just wonder, in terms of seeing the similarities here, is it possible that you had PC Aitken's statement in front of you when you wrote your statement?
I don't see how I would. I don't recall. It's just described in the same manner.
I mean, in some cases, the wording is exactly the same in the 2 statements. And I just wondered if there was comparison or if there was a style that you used. Perhaps PC Aitken's statement was used as a style?
The way I've written the statement appears to be the way I would normally write a statement, and
Right.
Follows the same pattern as statements I normally write. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Right. So is it just a coincidence that the wording is so similar?
I don't know. It must be. I don't know.
I'm just wondering if part of the reason why your recollection isn't maybe as sharp about the statement and preparing the statement is because you copied PC Aitken's statement.
I don't recall. I have no memory of doing it. There's a possibility I maybe asked PC Aitken
Do you want to see the top
what
of her
happened.
statement? We can go to the top.
What happened that day? I don't recall seeing any of it.
Yeah. Obviously, both statements say that they were verified as own,
Mm-hmm.
and the source was the notebook. And we've looked at your notebook, and we've looked at your operational statement, which contains additional details
Mm-hmm.
that aren't in your notebook. And it doesn't say that either of you relied on the scene entry log to prepare your statements. Is that unusual not to use the scene entry log?
It's not unusual. It's usually lodged as a production, or
Mm-hmm.
certainly not easily accessible.
It's not easily accessible to you.
No, if it's lodged, it's
Right.
in productions.
So by the August, when you're preparing this statement that's been requested, that wouldn't have been available to either of you.
No.
Is it possible that PC Aitken's memory of the events was just better than yours? And that's why we see additional information in her operational statement about the weather And the 5 people within, none of that information was in your notebook.
It's possible, yeah.
Is it common to use other officers' police statements to prepare your own?
No.
Oh, no. Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, it wouldn't be done. I just don't do it. I mean, I may have spoken to her about what happened that day, and she'll have gone through what she must have put in her statement of what her recollection was to assist me in writing my statement, but
Right.
certainly copying statements isn't acceptable.
All right. I mean, that's not something you would commonly do, is it?
No.
And she wouldn't be. Would that mean that she wouldn't give you her statement to copy?
No.
All right. All right, thank you. I'd like to ask you, we can take that off the screen now, please. I'd like to ask you some questions. We've not heard from DC Miller or DC Petrie, as they then were, but we hope at the end of this section of the hearings to hear from DC Miller. Can I ask you just about one or two things that we do have inquiry statements from them, and they'll be available to the chair. They've been signed, so they form part of the overall evidence that the chair can consider. And there's one or two things that they say respectively that I'd just like to check with you, and you can help me understand. So for those in the room, and I don't need it on the screen, DC Miller's inquiry statement is SBPI 00315. That's just so people know where I'm reading from, and it's paragraph 26. And DC Miller says, we more or less volunteered ourselves to go along. So he's talking about himself and DC Petrie to try and assist response. So the suggestion that he was trying to assist you as response. It wasn't really to take over or anything like that. It was just to provide assistance. But when we got there, they were looking for us to take the lead. Does that accord with your recollection that you were hoping they would take the lead on matters?
I would have been expecting them to take the lead, having been told to go and secure the locus, and I would have thought they would be the lead, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about, or they've been talking about taking the lead, what would you have expected the CID officers to do?
Well, I was sent to secure the locus and basically stand outside. So whatever was to be dealt with inside, I would have thought they would have been the ones dealing with the inside of the
And do you have any comments about this idea that they turn up to provide assistance, but he comments that they were looking for us to take the lead? Does that surprise you?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because I had, other than to secure locus, I had, to the best of my knowledge, no idea what it was all about, what the locus was for, and so I hadn't heard anything else on the radio or anything, so I assumed it was for CID. And so them turning up at locus would be to take control, if you like.
Yeah. And just for everyone who's listening today, is it the case that CID officers are seen as more senior, more
Well, DC is the same as a PC, but they're carrying out inquiries, I assumed, in relation to that address, so it would be their responsibility to And I had assumed it was on the request of CID that it was secured, so
Right.
them turning up is just a follow-on. I assumed that they were already prepared to come anyway, seeing as I was to be securing it. So
And in terms of the assumptions that you were making, you've talked about CID. Did you assume that CID were in charge of the investigation?
I assumed it was their inquiry, yes.
And because it was their inquiry, they would have more knowledge, perhaps, about
Yeah.
what was going on?
Mhm.
And then DC Petrie, just in fairness, to let you know what he says, uniformed officers had attended and they were looking for a bit of assistance in trying to secure that address. Does that seem to accord with your understanding?
I don't recall us having any problems securing it. It was purely that I'd been sent to and told the property was unoccupied and there was nobody within, to their turning up and there was people within, so we didn't have any problem securing it. It was just that the unknown was that there was people inside.
And if you'd turned up and there wasn't anyone in the house and you were going to secure the property, what would that have involved for you and PC Aitken?
It would have involved walking the perimeter and ensuring it was secure and guarding the doors, basically, keeping a sight all around the property. That would have been it.
Making sure nobody was going in and out?
Yes.
Without you at least recording that?
Yeah.
And so not entering the property
No.
at all, just standing at the doors and watching and observing.
Yes.
And then in anticipation of what? If the house had been empty and you're securing the property,
We'd have been there until we were stood down, or CID. My assumption would have been until CID turned up, or I was stood down, or somebody came to take over my post.
and so you'd assumed at some point, maybe not 10 minutes after you arrived, but at some point they would have come because you thought they were leading the investigation in.
Yes.
And they would have more knowledge about why that property was of
To
interest.
carry out their inquiries. Yep.
Right. And then DC Miller says in his statement, there were some people within the property and they weren't particularly happy about having to leave. So we were just going along to try and explain that to them. Do you remember when you were there, if the CID were explaining things to the occupants?
No. I don't.
And when he says they weren't particularly happy about having to leave, was that about having to leave the property?
I don't know.
Do you remember the people who were in the property, how they appeared to you? Would you agree that they weren't particularly happy?
It's not unusual for people to be unhappy about the police being at their door.
Mm.
And I don't recall there being any big hoo-ha, any issue other than, yeah, they wouldn't have been happy that police were there, which is perfectly normal.
Is that quite common then?
Mhm.
Nothing out of the ordinary as far as you could tell. DC Miller says in paragraph 30, we spoke to the officers just outside, just before we went in. I think they told us at that time that there was a disabled man, the kids were there, and there was an older lady as well. And they've also told us that they were not particularly happy as well. They weren't aggressive or anything like that, but they were annoyed, annoyed, rather than upset emotional, which is understandable. Do you remember anyone being upset, annoyed?
Constable, I've noticed on a number of occasions that you've nodded or shaken your head.
Yes.
The proceedings are being recorded, so would you say yes or no rather than just nod or shake your head?
Will do. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, I should have reminded you of that.
Sorry.
So I was asking if you remember anyone being annoyed, upset, annoyed, as is described.
No, I don't remember. Like I said, it's perfectly normal for people to have some form of dispute or not happy about the police being at their house. So it's run of the mill, yeah.
Right. DC Miller at paragraph 32 also says, I'm asked if I recall how many officers were already there when I arrived. So this is DC Miller. There were either 2 or 3. I think maybe the front door was locked and they were round the back door. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember why. We certainly went in the back door. I seem to think that there was somebody inside because when we chapped the door, I think it was an officer that let us in rather than Mrs. Rashid, but it's difficult to see. Do you remember if it was you that let DCs Miller and Petrie in?
No. I don't remember.
You don't remember
No.
at all? I mean, were you inside when the CID arrived?
I don't remember at all. I don't know.
Right. He also says it was Mrs. Rashid who spoke to us. Immediately she started asking questions. This is when they've arrived in the house.
Right.
Mrs. Rashid was one of the occupants, we've
Right.
heard. So immediately she started asking questions, what was going on, all the rest of it. We tried to explain what was happening and the need to take it. I think we've not heard from DC Miller, but I'm thinking he means to take the property.
Yes.
Do you remember being in the house when that conversation was going on?
No.
Mrs. Rashid asking a lot of questions?
No, I don't remember.
Do you remember if Mrs. Rashid was speaking when the CID arrived?
No. I don't remember being in the house with CID. I don't...
I thought earlier before the break you told us you'd gone into the kitchen area or into the house as a sort of silent vouching of the CID officers.
I basically showed them, other than showing them where the people were and just inside the door, and my presence showing them in and then leaving would be my involvement, I believe, but that's what I'm assuming my involvement was. I don't recall
Right,
exactly.
You just don't recall actually setting foot inside the house?
I do remember going in and seeing the people and the 5 people and whatnot, but I don't recall there being any particular major issue, shall we say, verbal or physical.
Do you remember a conversation, engagement between the officers and the people in the house?
I don't. I would only be assuming if I said yes that they would be engaging.
And you've mentioned 5 people. Where
Mhm.
were the 5 people that you remember seeing?
Where were they?
Yes, where in the house?
They would have been, I assume, in my vision, a few steps in, sort of thing, in the initial room. Is all I can
Right.
assume.
Well, I'm trying to work out what you actually remember,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't want you just to assume things if
Yeah.
possible. Can you try and think back? Were all 5 people in the room you were in?
the best of my memory, I think so.
Right. So do you remember what room that was that they were all in?
The first one I came to after going in the door,
Right.
which would be a kitchen, I would think.
And thinking back now, where were they positioned in that room?
Disabled male in the far corner, and possibly a lady standing. And
An
I think,
older lady or a younger lady?
I couldn't say. It was a lady, yeah.
Right.
And the rest were sitting, possibly on couches.
And on couches. So thinking of that answer, if there were couches, do you think maybe the room might have been more likely to be the living room?
Could be.
And can you describe the age of the lady standing?
In my head, I've got a female stood there. I don't have a visual recollection of the age. I haven't registered if it's a person in advanced years, elderly, or a younger female. I haven't.
You've said that the rest were sitting on couches.
Quite possible.
Can you describe the people sitting on couches?
As in their age or gender?
Anything that you can remember about them. If you remember age, tell us.
No. I couldn't say an age or... I've got them in my statement, the two adults and the children, but I remember the female standing and the disabled gentleman, and
We've heard he may have used a wheelchair.
that's why I refer to him as disabled.
Yes.
I know nothing more.
Yeah.
And then the kids on the couch. Yeah.
How many kids were on the couch?
It would be, well, it was two. I've said that there was two adults, disabled male, and the kids, so be the kids with another adult.
Another adult. And do you remember anything about the other adult who was on the couch?
No.
Age at all?
It was just a very quick scan, and focusing on the female that was standing nearest to me.
And why were you focusing on that female? Was there something in particular?
She was the first person I came to. That would be all.
Okay. Was she speaking at all?
I don't think she had any English.
Right.
That certainly became evident.
I'll come on to that in a moment. We've heard evidence that Mr. Said's mother didn't speak English or didn't speak good English. So is that probably who you remember standing in the...
It would have been because, she didn't have English, and I just, yeah.
Okay. So if DC Petrie says in his statement, my recollection is that uniformed officers were there before us, and I believe they were all in the property. Do you remember does that prompt any memories about you being in the property before the CID arrived?
Yes, because I was in to see what was going on inside with the lights being on and whatnot, and then
Okay,
radioed back to say, yeah.
thank you. Right. And DC Petrie also says, I believe Mrs. Rashid and her mother were in the living room, which was just a short distance from the door that we entered, which was a kitchen, and then you went into the living room. Does that sound familiar now?
It could well have been because the back door was a butted, came out from the main building, so yeah, it must have been the kitchen at the back door, and then turn right, and immediately there that must have been the living room, yes.
Right. And so it was, hearing that, does that make you think maybe where the people were was the living room of the
Yes.
house? Right. He describes Mrs. Rashid, not the mother, the other woman who was in the house, as being quite irate and asking questions. Do you remember anything about that,
No.
either in relation to her demeanour or her asking questions?
No. It's perfectly understandable. And,
All right.
but it's not unusual, again, for people to be irate at police in their house. So.
And so, thinking about that second time that you went into the property, how long did you spend in the property that time?
I don't know. It can't have been long. I don't remember at all. I didn't note the details, and I don't know how long I was in for.
Can you give us your impressions now, thinking back to that date?
A few minutes, quite possibly.
All right. And would that be in the living room?
Yes.
Did you go anywhere else in the house?
Not that I remember, no.
Right. Can we look at your inquiry statement again, please? Paragraph 33. I think this is where you talk about the people who were in the house. So let's just look at that. I do remember going a couple of paces in the door and seeing females in traditional cultural clothing and expressing to me by signage that they didn't understand what I was saying. English wasn't their first language. All I remember after that was being outside on locust protection, standing outside. I couldn't say how many people were in there. 2 or 3 is all I can guess. I can't remember anything else about what happened. But I think, thinking about things today, you've recollected from the scene entry log there were 5 people occupying the house.
Mm-hmm.
2 women,
Yes.
2 children, and a disabled man, you say.
Yes.
And I'm interested in your reference to traditional cultural clothing. Can you describe to us the clothing that the women were wearing?
Colourful colourful long dresses and some colourful head, some, wasn't a hat, it was wraps or something on the head.
Right. So did both of the women have their heads covered?
Yes, probably, yeah.
And can you describe the style of clothing? You've said it was colourful. Can you help us understand a little more about that?
I've got flowers in my head. I don't know if that's right, but it was certainly
Right.
patterns, various colours.
Now, there's no mention in the scene entry log at that stage of you entering the property or seeing the occupants. Thinking back now, is that the sort of information that should be in a scene entry log?
On reflection, I would say I should have put entries in to say I had entered the building. Yeah.
Right, right. So if you were doing it now, is that what you would do?
Yes.
And we've heard from Mrs. Rashid that she has, we've heard evidence from her that she was actually wearing pyjamas when the police arrived.
Right.
Would that accord with your recollection of the sort of colourful clothing?
Could do, yes.
Could be. And she also has given evidence that she was wearing a hijab. Is that the type of head covering that you were thinking of, you remembered seeing?
I don't know what the term is for the
All right.
headdress, but there was. It could be if that's what she says.
Was that also part of the traditional clothing that was being worn?
Yeah, I just took it as cultural clothing,
Right.
and I don't know the names for the specific items. Yeah.
Of course. Did you associate the way the women were dressed with any particular culture or religion or ethnicity?
I took it to mean they had a religious and cultural background different to mine.
Right.
I didn't, and I was becoming quite aware that they didn't have English or in any significance, and that predominantly the English was my concern. Yeah.
Right.
But
And
as far as religious, I wasn't aware what the religious. I couldn't assume what the religious and cultural, what meanings that gave me.
And did you, having become aware from your observations that they were wearing cultural clothing, did you seek to identify the particular religion or culture that they were part of?
In what, by asking them or
Yes.
no?
No. Did you, from your awareness at that time, consider that they might be members? You might be in the home of a Muslim family.
It didn't cross my mind. I was unable to communicate sufficiently with them, so that was my. I didn't take into account or, assume what their particular Muslim or otherwise religion.
And in terms of communication, were you attempting to communicate at this point, or did you remain silent?
On my initial entry into the house, it would
Wait,
be...
I'm talking about the period when you can see the people in the living room and you can observe their clothing. And you've said a moment ago about communicating. So were you trying to speak to them at that point, or trying to engage in conversation?
Yes. Oh, purely to explain my presence
Right.
and to create some dialogue, yeah, to find out what I could or could, what was going on, yeah.
Can you help me to understand the sort of things that you were saying at that stage in the living room?
It would be along the lines of that I was police, and was this their house? But it wouldn't have gone very far at all with it being obvious that they weren't understanding what I say. So I would have sought to get out again and to seek further guidance.
Who would be able to provide that further guidance to you?
It would be the duty sergeant I would be on to, because I was there. If I was there myself with my colleague, it would be my duty sergeant.
And that be through your radio?
Yes.
Observing the clothing and being aware that there may be cultural differences between you and the occupants, were you aware of any matters that perhaps you should be sensitive to in your role that day as an officer?
Not at that time. I making assumptions, I usually trip myself up if I make assumptions in houses or with the members of the public. So what was presented to me with what these people were wearing wouldn't automatically make me assume that they couldn't speak to me. No. And unless I was told, yeah.
Right. Had you had, at that time, a lot of training in issues regarding equality, diversity, inclusion, that type of thing?
I've had training.
When was that training? Prior to 2015?
It would have been at the college when I joined the police.
2009?
Yes.
Do you remember any other training in that respect between 2009 and 2015?
I don't know.
Right. And I think you say in your inquiry statement, I think you were asked about maybe an awareness whether Muslim women might feel uncomfortable in male company, and you said that you weren't aware of females being uncomfortable speaking to males.
Yeah, I'm aware of the religious, I won't say protocols, but it's not the right word, in relation to that, but I wouldn't automatically assume it, no.
No. Did you have much experience of dealing with people from different cultures in 2015?
Yes, the area Leavenmouth has many different cultures.
Right.
But I wouldn't always just assume. Some cultures, they may have enough English, for example, or are able to communicate what isn't acceptable for them. So then I just wouldn't assume that someone couldn't speak.
Would you expect them to volunteer that information to an officer?
Yes.
Would you invite them? Would you ask them if there's anything you could do as an officer to make things a more comfortable experience for them?
I would certainly, if that was made known to me, then I would absolutely facilitate that I was taken out of there, and that if it was male people, then a female would be changed for me.
And when you say made known to you, how would you expect that to be made known to you or communicated to you?
By the person I was speaking to. Yeah.
And if they have an issue...
Or some other person with them, yeah.
Right. If they have an issue with language, how would you expect that to be made known to you?
Probably by hand signs, or something of that sort. Or, yeah, like another member of the group or the family maybe have slightly more able to communicate that to me. It wouldn't take a lot, yeah.
Looking back now, with the situation, you said this was a situation you weren't anticipating. You thought no one was in the house.
Yep.
You'd not had experience of a situation like this, where you've arrived for locus and protection and told no one's in the house, but turned up and there were people in the house.
Yes.
But looking back now at the communication in the living room with the occupants,
Yeah.
do you think you would do it differently nowadays with the further experience that you have?
I think I went into that house to treat the people in the way I would want to be treated, and that is how I've always treated people that I've come across in my job, and so I would probably do the same again, and that other than maybe in the passage of time become even more aware of the cultural significance, but again, assuming their cultural religious leanings, isn't a problem. I wouldn't do it. I can't assume that somebody has cultural leanings without being informed.
Do you recognise that if people are from a different culture from your own, that treating them in the way you'd like to be treated might not actually be treating them in the way they'd like to be treated?
Yes. When I say treated the way I'm treated, I meant politely, respectfully, as opposed to me, myself, as a male person.
When you say respectfully, what did you know at the time about how respect can be shown to people from different cultures, different religions? Were you aware of differences?
I could tell that, yes, by the clothing, my assumption would be there would be differences. But to assume that some people deviate from their religions, some people by different amounts, and so I can't assume that they've deviated from the initial leanings or remain totally at it. And just by using calming hand signals and tone of voice and in an empathetic manner, sort of, that I would look to establish even a small amount of no male, no man, anything basic, but yeah, unless I couldn't just assume it.
So if that had been communicated in some way, sign language or maybe a few words, what would you have done at that point?
If it was to be known, yeah, that it was me as a male person was the problem, then yeah, I would remove myself straight away.
And would you then contact the office on the radio?
I would, well, I felt PC Aitken was female, so it would be,
Was she in the living room at that time?
I don't know, but I was with PC Jackie Aitken. Being a female, she could take over my engagement with the lady.
Okay. And how would you then communicate those cultural differences with other officers? You're the scene entry log. You're entering things into that log. Is that a means of communicating cultural differences with other people at the scene?
I would certainly pass it verbally, and to whoever was to be entering. As to, I would, and quite possibly when PC Aitken was noting the details, which I'm assuming it was her, then she would put a small note next to the name saying no males spoken.
Right. So again, if she'd been told that by the occupants. Anything else, any other areas in the scene entry log where you would mention cultural issues?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, no.
I mean, if we look back at the scene entry log, which was PS 18504, there was the page, I can't remember which number it was now. There it is. There doesn't seem to be, so this is the page that you said wasn't your writing. It mentions
Yes.
Mr. Ahmed, Mrs. Rashid, and it did go on to the next page. If we could just look at that briefly. There we are. This is the entry I asked you about earlier.
Yes.
1310. Let's go back up to the previous page. There's nothing in any of that part of the scene entry log that mentions cultural issues.
No.
No. Is there anywhere on the scene entry log that you remember would be an appropriate place to put something like that in?
I would assume next to their name would
Alright.
be an appropriate place.
But no column that specifies that.
Not that I can think of, no.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Let's go back to your inquiry statement, please, back to paragraph 33. And you talk there about signage. They didn't understand what I was saying. English wasn't their first language. And we have heard evidence that the mother wasn't good at English, wasn't able to speak English, but Mrs. Rashid gave evidence in English.
Right.
When you said expressed to me by signage that they didn't understand what I was saying, can you explain to us what was happening there? Do you remember what the signage was?
I don't remember, but
No. Right. We've heard evidence that in 2015, officers could use their radios to contact an interpreter. Do you remember that?
yes.
Is that something you tried to do that day or considered?
Oh, I didn't do it that day.
Right. In paragraph 34, you say, I have been asked what I would normally do if someone was signing that they couldn't understand what I was telling them. I would look to gain the services of someone who could establish communications with them via an interpreter, or a person who could communicate with them, more than likely an interpreter. I would seek to try and ascertain what language that they would be most comfortable using. So is there a reason that, well, paragraph 35, I can't remember what happened after that, whether there was an interpreter requested or not. Do you remember if you asked for an interpreter that day?
I don't remember, but my interaction with them was brief. I had no knowledge of what was to be lying ahead in the inquiries, and that it would be up to CID who would arrive and sort things out.
Right. And then if we can just for a moment look back at 33, you say there towards the end of that, all I remember after that was being outside on locust protection, standing outside. I couldn't say how many people were in there, 2 or 3 is all I can guess. I can't remember anything else about what happened. And then if we go down to paragraph 52, I've been asked if I remember any of the occupants beyond the females I mentioned earlier. From my statement, I can only assume there was a disabled male. This would mean a male in a wheelchair. That's what I would mean by writing disabled. I have no memory of it. But am I right in thinking that you do have a recollection now of seeing them in the living room, the disabled male in the wheelchair, a woman standing, and 3 people on the couch, an adult female and 2 children? You do remember that?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if there's a difference between your statement to the inquiry and your evidence today, should we prefer your evidence today?
Well, it's what was presented to me whilst I was giving the statement, and it's kind of started to create a picture for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, it's never been far from my brain ever since, and I wasn't able to discuss it with anyone, and so just through myself mulling it through may well have triggered up more. It's possible.
And so and today the process of going through things in a lot of detail, has that also helped trigger some of the recollection that you've been able to give us today?
To an extent, yeah.
Right. So if there is any difference, should the Chair prefer the evidence today?
Yes.
Thank you. And at paragraph 53, you say, I wouldn't do anything differently with the wheelchair user other than take into account the constraints of somebody with mobility issues. I'd need to take into account their needs. I'd ask what they required and ensure any reasonable request was made.
Yes.
And is that something that you did on the day, taking account of the needs of the adult male who was in the wheelchair, asking what they required and ensuring any reasonable request was met?
I had no... To the best of my memory, I didn't have any interaction with the chap, and I was only in there such a brief period, as far as I can remember, that I had no opportunity to speak with the person, I think, or engage. And when I was in and out so briefly that I didn't give him any opportunity to say anything.
Right. So you didn't have any communication or attempted communication with him. And so on the 3rd of May, you didn't do any of this?
No.
At all, right. Did anyone else try to engage with him or take account of his needs when you were present?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Right. In relation to that, you say you would take account of the constraints of someone with mobility issues. Was that information that you shared with your duty sergeant? that there was someone in the house in a wheelchair?
I think I was more. I don't think I did. No, I think it was more just the fact there was people within
Right.
that was my overall consideration or concern. But if it came to it,
Were you aware from your involvement with the occupants that one of them had had surgery recently
no,
and one of the children had had surgery?
no,
Do you remember the occupants leaving the property?
no.
Were you there when they left?
I don't know when did they leave. I would be able to tell you if I was there, but I don't know when they left.
Can we see that on the scene entry log? Do you want to look at that again? You've got the hard copy, but we can have that back on the screen. That's PS 18504. And page 9 might be the best place to start. So this, we looked at this earlier. This is page 9, I think. It starts with your first entry, Fraser 1330.
Yes.
And we can go, and we then see PC Aitkins with you. We see Petrie and Miller named, arriving at 1340, 10 minutes after you started the scene entry log. We go on to the next page. And there's officers obviously mentioned there.
Yes.
Carry on, please. And then we see other officers mentioned. And then at the bottom of that page, it's 2105. You'll see SOC, Mr. Foyt's scene of crimes. And then further down the next page, please. We'll see these are the final two entries, 2105. The name and designation is Saeed Sahid. Occupier assisting MIT recovering items. And then 2135 hours locus protection concluded.
Yes.
You'd concluded your own tour of duty at 6 o'clock that day. So this was after
Yes.
your involvement was completed. There doesn't seem to be any mention there of people leaving.
No.
No. Would you not normally expect that to be in the log? Is there somewhere else in the log where we can see that?
I would have thought it would be in the log. Yes.
Right. And you have no recollection of the family leaving the property?
No.
No. Or any of the events around that?
No.
Is there anyone else that would have been doing the log at that stage?
PC Aitken. If I was there, and whoever was at the area of where they would be coming out the door towards the road.
Did you have any involvement at all with the family's arrangements to leave the property?
No.
No. Do you remember Mr. Ahmed, the father, arriving at the property?
No.
Do you remember if there was any searches carried out in the property?
No, I don't.
Don't remember. I think in paragraph, we won't go to it at the moment, in paragraph 68 of your inquiry statement, you say you don't remember whether you wore any gloves or, blue gloves as part of your entry there. Can we look at the page 10 of the scene entry log, which we've got on the screen? And it says, do you see at 1530 your name? This is when you've returned from your comfort break. You see in the protective clothing worn column, the N is scored out and it says, yes, you wore protective clothing. And that would amount to gloves, overshoes, mask, suit, or other, if there was any, nothing specified.
Yes.
So your inquiry statement, you don't remember wearing blue gloves. It appears from the log, and that's your writing, that you did wear some protective clothing. Can you tell us, did you wear protective clothing?
No, I think that's a misplaced line on my part, which should have gone down the yes column as opposed to the N no column.
So that was maybe a mistake
Yes.
on your part. I mean, were you involved at any stage in putting on protective clothing and perhaps going around the house or looking for items or anything of that sort?
Not to my memory, no.
And thinking now today, do you remember putting on blue gloves?
No.
Right. I mean, if you enter a locus that is secure, presumably you should be wearing protective clothing.
Well, with me turning up and expecting nobody there and there being people in, you're right, I should have worn gloves, but it overtook me
Right.
to find out who was in as opposed to getting gloves.
So if we look at the entry above yours, this is at 3 o'clock, 1500 hours. It's Adams. I think this is when you went on a comfort break.
Mm-hmm.
The ends are scored out there as well. Do you think that's another, perhaps just not quite in alignment? Because above it we see a line right down the middle of the yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
That's for Ward, Officer Ward.
Yeah.
But the one on the bottom of that page at 1705, the yeses are scored out. So does that help you when you compare the other entries on that page?
Yeah, it's a bit too nonchalant, and with the pen, it would appear.
Right. We've heard evidence from Mrs. Rashid, as I said earlier, that she recalled officers wearing gloves and looking round the rooms upstairs in the property. Was that you?
Not to my knowledge, no. I have no memory of
You
that.
don't have any memory
No.
of that? Do you remember any officers wearing gloves?
No,
No. I mean, do you remember going upstairs
no.
in the property? And you didn't have any involvement when the occupiers left the property. We've heard evidence from Mrs. Rashid that she had left some items and wanted to recover them,
Right,
but she wasn't permitted to do that.
right.
Do you know, in your experience as in locus protection, what parameters are there in terms of discretion for an officer? If somebody who's occupied a property comes back and says, I forgot an item in the house, can I
Right.
get it? What sort of things are factors in whether you allow either them to go back into the property or for you or someone to go in and collect items?
If they came to me and asked to get something, then I would consult whoever was crime scene manager or in charge at the locus. I wouldn't. I would pass the request on to them to make a decision. It's not something that I would decide myself.
Right. But you weren't involved in any of that
No,
on the
not
day?
to my no.
Right. I don't have a lot of further questions. Can you just give me a moment
Yes.
and I'll check through. We've not got the scope records. I've got one or two further questions. Perhaps this would be an appropriate time to...
We'll stop
to
for lunch
finish.
and sit at 2 o'clock.
Thank you.